good evening. Welcome to Depot. My name is Sarah van Dordrecht. I'm the director, and I'm very happy to celebrate the beginning of fall with you all. It's a pleasure to have you back. Visiting Critics Vienna, it's an ongoing partnership. Thanks Verein K, Jelena, Dejan and Klaus for organizing this event. The critics did a deep dive into Austria's art scene, and it's always a pleasure to learn from their perspectives. You have a very busy schedule, so thanks for being here tonight. Some notes before we start. There is a live stream, so hi for those who watch online. Only the panel will be filmed. If you ask a question, your voice will be recorded. If you don't want that, please give me a sign. Please check our program. We have a focus on alliances between art and society this year. There's also a lot of events in English. There's a newsletter. Come back and share our events. And I'm very sorry to inform you that the bar is currently under construction. Some people already noticed, so today there will be self-service and it will reopen soon. Please pay as you wish as a donation. And thank you so much for being here. I wish you a great evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Welcome also from my side for Verein K. We're three co-founders with Jelena Kalojerovic and Dejan Kalojerovic. We've been running three programs for many years now: a Visiting Curators program, a Visiting Critics program, and Crit Cross. And today the discussion of the Visiting Critics happens as one of the Crit Crosses, which is a forum on criticism and art criticism. And of course, we're very happy that we can do it at Depot. Thank you also from our side, and also to our sponsors, the Federal Ministry for Arts, Culture, Civil Service and Sport, the City of Vienna, Bildrecht, and the 7th District of Vienna from the budget for culture of the Neubau District, who sponsor these two programs together, or some one, some the other. Well, I've had a chance and the pleasure of meeting this year's critics when they arrived and watching them work a little bit yesterday. But I'd like to do a short introduction of your profiles, to say all the fancy things that it would be too embarrassing to say yourselves, or at least some of them. So Gabriel Bogossian, who's sitting next to me, is from Brazil. He's an independent curator, art writer and translator. He's based in Sao Paulo, just finished his PhD thesis before he arrived here. And he was a curator, at Galpao Video Brazil, and also invited curator for the art biennial SESC Video Brazil. Worked in Zurich, and the list is very long, in Tenerife, Montevideo, and other places. And the full profiles are also on our website, so I won't go into the full length. He translated works as well into Portuguese by Antonio Gramsci and Svetlana Alpers, among others. He has a PhD in philosophy now. Thank you for being here. Soukaina Aboulaoula is from Morocco. She's an independent curator and researcher. It's always important. It sounds like nothing, but you really, I know it from myself, one is really careful what you write. Are you a critic? Are you an art writer? So even though it can sound like just a mandatory exercise, if you listen closely, you already understand a little bit about the positioning. So researcher and curator based in Marrakesh, Morocco. Holds a Master's of Research in Advanced Practice from Goldsmiths, University of London, and recently had a fellowship from the Andrew Mellon Foundation for 3 years. She curated exhibitions in Morocco, England, France, and is currently a curatorial fellow with the ARA collection, where she is developing an exhibition drawn from the collection that will take place in Johannesburg in 2026. She also co-founded the Platform for Editorial Design and Art Direction, launched in 2017. Thank you also for being here.
Thank you.
Miona Muštra is an art critic, historian, lecturer, and researcher based in Zagreb. Since 2014, she has taught at the Academy of Fine Arts, training students in diverse formats of writing about visual art practice. Her critical writing has appeared in Contura Art Magazine, Kulturpunkt.hr, and it analyzes contemporary exhibition practices and art phenomena. She's very interested in ways to transmit art to non-expert audiences, ways to include more people, and we'll talk a bit about that afterwards. Thank you for being here as well. And Eugene Yiu Nam Cheung is a writer, cultural worker, and founding editor of The Colonial Hacker. He's now based in Berlin, but has also worked in Shanghai and various other places. He holds degrees in art history, gender studies, and law from the University of Sydney, and currently teaches critical theory and curatorial practice in the Design Academy, Eindhoven. He was a curatorial fellow at Whitechapel, curator in residence at Delfina Foundation, worked at Julia Stoschek and Documenta 15. His writing has appeared in Earflags, Criticism, Third Text, Art Review, Art in Australia, and elsewhere. And he has won the International Award for Art Criticism, IAIC, in 2021. Thank you. And I'd like to follow up immediately with you, if you'd like. I had a chance of, as I said, watching you work a little bit and not being the critic myself, but rather watching and saw that you had a very kind of strong approach of querying, of questioning, and trying to really get an answer to your questions when we were in a studio visit. What is it you're looking for when you meet an artist?
Okay, right, thanks. What am I looking for? I don't think I'm looking for anything particular. Usually I don't ask for studio visits unless I have a concrete offer to curate someone in a show, because a studio visit is still a labor relation, right? When you go see a artist in their studio, that they take time to host you, you have to take time out of your day and so on and so forth. So I find it a big waste of time if it's just to get to know someone, because in the age that we live in now, you can find most things online. So in terms of a studio visit, if I go and I ask, I'm 80-90% sure that I want to invite someone to an exhibition or work with them in some way. Now, the question of what happens in the studio itself, I'm looking for, I guess, rigor writ large, in the sense of being able to justify the choices that that they've made as an artist, whether that be through history, through a social fact, or a formal inquiry. I don't think there's necessarily like a set amount of rules that I go in with. I just sort of let it happen. But again, I don't really ask for studio visits. They just happen, and I generally know what the artist is about if I'm meeting them. So.
When you say you look for rigor, is there space for intuition? Like, can artists say, "Oh, there's no reason for having done this"? Is there a place for that, or would you say no? An art practice today has to be so rigorous that everything can be justified?
Well, there's layers to that question, right? I mean, I think that one of the preoccupations with art making is that it always comes from some kind of impulse, elementally. You know, an artist always feels as though they are a singular voice that has to bring a reality into being or bring into existence some kind of object or experience. But I think that intuition has to also be married with justification, in the sense that I don't, for instance, care much about artists who make works about their own life, because I don't think that's typically very interesting. This is something I tell my students, you know, when they come into the classroom. I say, don't tell me anything about your life, or I don't necessarily have to care if you've gone through some kind of aberrant trauma, or if something has happened to you that you find personally very egregious. Sure, what's happened to you may be felt as unjust, but unless that fits into a kind of social history or a larger set of implications or consequences, I personally do not have much interest in that. So I think the question of intuition is, of course, always there. And I think, you know, what we spoke about yesterday was this question of sincerity. Sure, artists can be sincere, artists can be intuitive, but what makes me and the world feel as though they should have some interest in what you do? Why should we care? And so the practices that are purely navel-gazing, I don't have much interest in. So perhaps that's a roundabout answer to your question.
If you have something, do you have a thought on this question of the autobiographical aspect in art? Feel free to always raise your hand or take the mic and jump in. You had a thought on this, I feel.
Well, I don't necessarily already have a prepared answer, which is a kind of a funny thing, because yesterday we were actually talking about this, and you did make mention of the fact that this is something that we are going to talk about, but actually misinterpreted it, honestly thinking that basically you were giving us input as to how to go about it. So my answer is not prepared, but it, I think, comes also as something that might be illustrative, and that is the fact that I rarely go to studio visits. I honestly think it doesn't, I never really, okay. I feel a need to respond to that. Okay, I don't know whether that is disagreement from the audience. So what I wanted to say is that I don't think it's a formalized kind of experience, at least not to me. I think it's also a comment on the development of a scene. And I come from one which doesn't have that as a formalized experience. I've had a great deal of experience with this over the course of this residency. But in my experience, it is more to do with the way that I talk to students, because I teach at the Academy of Fine Arts, and the way I allow them, I give them a certain input of some kind of, let's say, structure to go about it when they present their work, or at least when they have a dress rehearsal of presenting their work. But mainly I think it's about the critical position being a responsive one, listening to what they have to say and responding, hopefully in a helpful and creative way, and sometimes also taking the position of the devil's advocate in thinking of what potential audience or community or to whomever they wish to communicate might interpret whatever they're doing in which way they might interpret it. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and it's great that you already started talking about teaching, because I wanted to ask about this. When you teach students, art students, I presume, in the Art Academy mainly? Or?
I teach at the Academy of Fine Arts, so, yes. Yeah. I have other teaching experience, but this one is, I guess, a primary.
What do you transmit, and does this connect to your own kind of desire to make art more accessible? Because very often you could be teaching, of course, in the Art Academy, the kind of discourses that the art world is interested in, and then you go out and try to do public programs for other audiences. But is there a connection for you in teaching young artists to not only, let's say, try to convince their fellow students that their work is great, or the professors to like it, but to go beyond and make them conscious of an audience that maybe doesn't have their expertise?
Well, I guess, I mean, it's a layered process. I mean, I teach at entry level, which means first year, second year, and also to some extent the third year. But I think I mean, the best way to answer your question is to say that even among the art students, the actual students of the Academy of Visual Arts, there is a great degree of I'm looking for the best word at this point, but I guess apprehension towards the art world, and there is, I think, even a degree of animosity. So initially I start by addressing, basically telling them, I mean, cutting up the whole experience into pieces, addressing the various institutions and kind of disarming that. And afterwards, I kind of try to allow them to embrace the discursive field and try to also advocate for that as a reflexive practice on what they are doing in whichever field they are doing. So I said a great deal of things which are not necessarily connected, but hope from there we can follow up on the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much. Soukaina, you're a researcher as well. I know that you've studied the historical avant-gardes. Do you have the feeling that this helps you read the present art world? Is there a connection of maybe the impetus of the avant-garde, both in Morocco or elsewhere in other contexts where you have been? How does history and the contemporary connect or dissociate for you?
Well, first of all, I'll have to say that as you, when you were reading my biography, you said that I'm a curator and a researcher, and for me, research is the curatorial format that I work with. So I would say that research is part of my curatorial process, and indeed, I did a research around the modern art history in the Maghreb, notably in Morocco, thanks to an Andrew Mellon funded grant. And in that process, I wasn't really interested in developing some sort of genealogy of modernism in Morocco, but rather trying to understand the kind of promises that were made during that time and how the younger generation are really following up on that. And I was more interested in a symbol, a sort of black sun, a black ink symbol that appeared on the cover of the magazines of Souffle from the mid-60s, journal, a literally critical journal that happened in Morocco from the mid-16s. And I was really interested in the development of that period throughout the development of that sun. And then I realized that actually that sun represented the effective archive of that generation. And while I was trying to interact with it, I realized that what I was looking for was more a sort of staging the temporalities of that period. I was looking at the silences, I was looking at the gaps and the kind of conversations that can be allowed thanks to those interruptions. And so just to get back to your question, I absolutely feel that it is helping me in my curatorial approach, in the sense that what I'm looking for in my practice is how the history is narrated, the sort of interruptions and circulations of knowledge that happen due to either political, social context, for instance, in Morocco. And I'm also very much intrigued by the politics and poetics of visibility. What can we make visible and what can we choose not to make visible, just as artistic practice, as artistic gesture, but also from the curatorial dimension. And so, yeah, definitely those attempts of the avant-garde are continuing, for sure, at least in Morocco. I wouldn't be able to talk about the Viennese context because we've been here for like a week. Yeah.
When you say we can choose, I'm intrigued to not make something visible, or what we choose to make visible. Do you have some specific examples in mind? Would you say, is it more a political statement, or is it more a kind of theoretical statement?
I think it can be both, and I think it also ties to the question of accessibility that Miona was just discussing. I think sometimes abstracting meaning or hiding meaning could actually be very empowering in contexts where we are expected to be very articulate or visible. And so, yeah, it's definitely political.
So there's a space for not being clear.
Yes, absolutely, always.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And well, I come to you as well. You translate theory. You work in theory. What's the role of theory when you start to do critical writing? When you curate, would you say you're a kind of theory-based curator, or where does the drive come from for the writing and for the curating, respectively?
Wow. No, actually, these two activities are not really related. I think as a translator and as a theorist or art writer, I'm more interested in fitting the debate, and as a curator, more interested in working with artists and developing new projects. As you mentioned, I just finished my PhD, and this 4.5 years I didn't work in big shows, on small projects, and decided to focus on helping artists or working with artists to develop their ideas. So these two activities are not really related in my curatorial practice, or I mean, the critical or art writing. And the translation thing is a bit of a job. Sometimes, mostly I don't choose the text I'm working with, although they sometimes become really important to the future development of my work. It's a sort of public service, as you mentioned yesterday, my writing and my translations. The curatorial is a bit different in this sense.
Thank you. You said sometimes you try to help artists to articulate something. What do all of you see as your role as art writers for the artists, or who are you working for, and public, the artist? There is, of course, a history of the avant-garde that is supposed to go like this. Before art was accessible to many people, the critic was representing the bourgeois and speaking in their voice, but then art became so complex in the avant-garde that the critics became explainers of the art on behalf of the artists, and now they're siding with the artists, hence the audience is not supposed to be trusting the critic anymore because they are considered a kind of extended voice of the artist. But there's also something positive in that sense of, articulating something in words, which maybe is not so articulated. But how do you see your own role? Do you see yourself already as critic? So a lot of you use the term art writer in your self-descriptions rather than critic. Is there one of you who would say, no, I'm an art critic? Hands up.
I am not an art critic. No, I think, first of all, I don't identify as an art writer, as a curator, and I think that curating and criticism are sister jobs, I think. I feel that one actually creates the discourse and the conditions for the other to expand on, so they complement each other. And I think that at the end of the day, at their core, they are really both about translating and relating, mediating the art, and putting the art in relation, first of all, to each other, second, to the context that they are operating from and also displayed in, and to the audiences. So I think there is an important aspect of staging relation that both exists in curation and also criticism, and which is why I found some sort of ease with saying, okay, I will do a criticism residency. It's fine. It's curators could also be critics. I think that in this gesture of relationality, it's very present. For instance, personally in my thinking and in my writing, curatorial writing, that is very critical. And I think also it allows us really to create a similar analytical and contextualization approach that is also present in criticism. And I think today we have witnessed a sort of shift from the positioning of the critique or the commissaire d'exposition as an authority to more someone who is responsible for making and allowing space for contradiction, be it a space in text or a physical space. And I think that these contradictions are what's making the conversation today. So we're shifting from authority, and we're shifting also from a strict objective, subjective reading of situations. So yeah, I think relationality maybe is what links them.
Eugene, what's your relation to authority?
Well, I mean,
no,
before my sort of whatever relation to authority, I want to circle back to your references to the avant-garde, and I think maybe to sort of tighten that notion of the avant-garde, I always think about Peter Bergel's definition, the theorist, which is that the avant-garde artists, the thing that united them was trying to break away from bourgeois tradition. That's the one thing that united the historical avant-gardes. And I think pinpointing the avant-garde and then moving to a question about one's role as a writer or a critic is interesting, because I think that for me, when I write, I'm thinking about where is the avant-garde, and I don't think there is an avant-garde, because I think that the rejection of the avant-garde, the rejection of the bourgeois conditions as is the Bergel definition of the avant-garde, is not materially possible, in particularly right now, in the sense that we are all wedded to some kind of egregious, iniquitous, evil capital, which is just the material conditions of the day. But I think as a writer, the stakes of being an art writer or an art critic or writing about art and so on and so forth is that you can provide an aperture through which people can understand how they might be able to still do this, what sort of position of hope you might be able to afford mass society. And I always go back to then Walter Benjamin, the great Jewish German thinker and so on and so forth, where he writes in The Author as Producer that the author or the creator of a work of art or a work of text or so on and so forth, their political tendency has to match their formal innovation. And so the question then becomes for me, how do you take a form as styred and ossified and as I guess, beholden to its own contradictions as art criticism and make it radical? And that's a very big question. And so whenever I write, I think to myself, how can the person reading what I do think about the creation of a revolutionary condition? And so I personally don't, I mean, when I was younger and I was cutting my teeth as an art critic in Australia, I loved the term, I'm an art critic. There's some kind of gravitas to it, right? This kind of, whatever authority and so on and so forth. But I think that, I've rejected that as the years have gone by, because I see my role perhaps as a writer, teacher, and so on and so forth as more of one that perhaps I can make people think that, you can reject these histories and this kind of like destructive world in which we live. And so I think that if there is anything to describe myself, I wouldn't label it to a term, but more to that political tendency that Benjamin talks about, where I'm trying to make people feel as though revolutionary conditions are possible. And to do that, I look at, the Baader Meinhof-Bande and, Ulrike Meinhof and, these revolutionary leftist groups, and also, the 67 movement in Europe, and thinking about how the Situationists, when they were around, were trying to actually make Europe communist. Like, that was kind of the entire thrust of their political project. And I think to myself, what has happened to us that now seems like such a radically impossible position? And perhaps there is some way that in my own work, in my writing, I can recreate and restoke those conditions to be alive and possible.
I love that idea of introducing this form of radicality into the writing. Can you give us a few examples of how you've tried to do that? Like, what were kind of gestures where you're like, okay, there I was trying, maybe.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I run an online journal called Decolonial Hacker, which is, it's sort of an online criticism platform that runs through a web browser extension, so a plugin that you can download for Google Chrome and Firefox. And when you have it downloaded and you go onto an institutions page like MoMA or the Barbican, a piece of criticism or commissioned artwork or a text will pop up that provides an alternative reading of the history of that place. And so it's thinking, and it essentially annotates the official history of an institution. And it's a choice, right? You download the plugin, you download the extension, and you see these texts, and you're able to think differently about these inherited narratives about the places in which we're meant to reify. That's a small gesture, of course, and you don't need the plugin to use it. You can just go on the website and read the text. But it's a very peripheral intervention into this political impulse. But that's, I don't think that I'm like the vanguard of this per se, but it's an attempt, right? So that's perhaps one example.
And would you? I don't know if you feel it's a secret revealed, but I think your commission that you suggested for this residency is also quite radical. That text you wanna write about.
Oh, I mean it's not radical. I mean, whatever. I mean, okay. So full disclaimer, my fellow lovely, amazing resident colleagues have heard me talk or wax lyrical about my crazy obsessions over the last 10 days, but I love Austrian literature. Like, I adore Austrian literature. And the sort of queen of this for me is Ingeborg Bachmann, and she very famously moved from poetry to prose because she felt as though she exhausted language in poetry. Anyway, but she was meant to write the Ways of Dying trilogy, the Todesarten-Trilogie, auf Deutsch. And she only managed to do one before dying. There's three. That two of them are kind of complete. One's definitely complete. Malina is the one that everyone knows. Das Buch Franza is the other one that's more or less complete. And Requiem for Franny Goldman is the third, which is in a very nascent state. The idea I had for the text I was going to write was essentially invoking the spirit of Ingeborg Bachmann, whose entire sort of corpus in prose was thinking about how the heterosexual couple form was an inherent distillation of fascist relations. So men and women enact fascist dynamics between one another, and essentially, she was a Wittgenstein scholar and so on and so forth, but she was thinking about how the structural and the public manifest in the private. And she was at the beginning of exploring this in the Ways of Dying trilogy, and she met a very sort of early end. She lit a cigarette in her bed in Rome, and she was on so many opioids she couldn't feel herself on fire, so she burned to death. It was very unfortunate. And so the idea for my text is to sort of enchant her spirit into being once more and think about what Ingeborg Bachmann would think about the contemporary Viennese art scene. And I think her prognosis would be pretty fatal. So the text that I want to write is essentially Ingeborg Bachmann walking through Curated by and being like, well, this is kind of fascist, isn't it? So, yeah.
Okay.
It's not radical per se, it's just kind of a little bit. No, not you, Christiana. Not you, not you, darling. Not you. She's a comrade, not you.
Yeah, thank you for this little preview. So there will be texts. there won't be blood, hopefully, but there will be texts in the future of the critics. As each year, there is also one of the outputs is this discussion, but one is also the text they will write about their experience, and you can go through the archive from the last years. Miona, I was very interested in your impulse of making art more accessible, and how does it articulate, and where did it come from in you? I have this fellow impulse, full disclosure. I also feel that we are often too much trapped in our kind of bubble speech and for what have you. I don't want to talk too much about myself, but what was your impulse in doing that, and how do you try to do it?
Okay, thank you for the question, but I would like to just take a step back and kind of try to give a very basic answer to your earlier question, which was asked of Eugene before he went down the reference, very meaningful and poetic and creative reference lane, but he was mentioning radical politics. And your question was related to the to us mostly, not myself, though not to that extent, disowning the title of a critic. And the fact of the matter is that our residency is actually titled Visiting Critics, so somebody needs to actually step in those shoes. And I'm not really positioning myself as any kind of martyr here, but what I'm trying to say is there is this omnipresent assumption that the critic is a bourgeois individual who passes judgment from a position of power. And while this may have been the case, and I absolutely do agree, at some point in time, those references, those early 20th century references with these apodictic critics who actually made mistakes. So there is a degree of bravery, bourgeois albeit, but there is a degree of bravery in putting your name and staking certain claims, and then ultimately from you being historically wrong, a canon being forged. But today, to claim that a critic is, I mean, certainly there is a degree of privilege because you all clearly need to put in a lot of education in order to, I won't say pass judgment, but make any kind of comments on not just the art, but of course the political context around it, the various positions of power, and also curatorial work. But to make it as basic as possible, critics are some of the most power-bereft people in the field and working under horrid material conditions, because ultimately, I mean, I don't know whether I should go to the most basic level of saying that ultimately you need to read 3 books, spend 2 weeks of your time, and ultimately you get 150 euros. Which is not necessarily the case with other professions in the field. So I think from that position also we need to perhaps radicalize the talk in a sense that yes, I mean there are horrid conditions in the field at every level, and also I mean we can open the question of the media crisis and ultimately the crisis of the written word, which I think is something that is upcoming, and it's questionable to which degree it is actually discussed out of, I guess, fear of going wrong. Like, I don't know, Louis Vaucel was so wrong, but ultimately his mistakes went down in history as cubism, which is part of our everyday reference field. And I do apologize, but there was a very articulate question you asked of me.
No, let's follow.
I think there is an implicit answer also here in what I said. But yes, writing about art from that, let's say, critical framework, whatever it is, I won't go into analysis right now, is a starting point for historicizing not just art, but the political conditions under which we all live. And I think this is a very important and a very courageous position to take. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm always taking it. I'm just, it can be.
Soukaina or Gabriel, do you want to follow up on this?
Perhaps it's a bit naive, but I just wanted to say at the end of the day, it's the same set of conditions that are needed for all cultural work, like criticism, curation. You need to care about the work to be able to respond to it, and so or hate it, but at least have some sort of feeling. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add. And also maybe, sorry, it's perhaps this bourgeois feeling of authority that you mentioned is also due to what I feel is this definitive approach of the writing in criticism that, for instance, in curation is more propositional and more suggestive and opens dimensions for interpretation. So I think maybe it's easier to find comfort in the title of curator rather than to really have a definitive approach like a critique, I think.
But don't you think that the two practices are related in terms of selection and judging and election?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so there's inherently discrimination also in curating because you choose to show certain things and not to show others, but I do see the point that a curation is not usually a statement, and sometimes it could be more of a statement than it usually is, I feel. I'm even missing the actual statement sometimes, but it's definitely when you write a critical text, yeah, there's this statement character, and yeah, I can see that. I mean, talking about the material conditions, I don't want to leave that unsaid, even though maybe it's clear for a few people criticism is paid very badly, curating is paid so I don't know if that was one reason why 3 of you are writers and curators, but curated by, I mean, I think it's a public figure. The curators get 2,500, is that still the figure? 3,000. 3,000 euros, whereas if you write about one of the shows, you get 1,150 euros from most magazines. So curation is often a way for people who write criticism to earn somewhat closer to a living wage. But maybe moving on beyond the material conditions again, and the second part of the conversation is really around your experience here. So it's always a bit about getting to know you and the position, and then also hearing your thoughts. And I think everybody's very curious also about the second part. Is there, something that struck you particularly, or that stuck with you, Gabriel, in your visit here?
Sure. Yeah. As we've been talking, the first thing is the absence of some key political topics of our times. Obviously, I'm referring to Gaza and specifically, but also other political topics that could be brought, such as the right wing and the fund of arts related to the censorship. So I think for all four of us, this was the most striking topic. And I was happy to see in some spaces, such as Improper Walls, a group show, a collection of works curated by Andrea Ancina, who is here. The show is called The Silence of the Volcano, a show that breaks this silence, let's say, or the happiness of this sort of Viennese ball in a very precise and sharp way. The show brings together artists from Guatemala. I'm from Brazil. This, of course, made things there really familiar to me. But yes, the most striking aspect, I would say, was a lack of friction, not only between art pieces, but also between the art practices and the wider political sphere.
Little public service announcement. Gabriel is also working on a text on the question of censorship. So if there are any informants in the room, approach him discreetly after the conversation for hints in this direction. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I also would like to add, my practices, after the PhD, I did some kind of Hegelian turn out of art towards philosophy and specifically politics. I think it's an important aspect. And getting back to your first question, this is what I would look for in a studio visit, some sort of political affinity.
Affinity with your own?
With my own, yeah.
Own politics, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, other observations, Soukaina?
Sure, I think what's really striking to me during this trip is how sometimes the weight of institutions can overpower or overcome the actual theme of the show. For instance, one example is the exhibition at the Albertina, the exhibition Yitka Hanslova Identities. And I think, I don't know if you've seen the show, but the show is very attentive in many ways to questions of representation, subjectivity, and how identity is shaped and perceived. And I think that exhibition really made me reflect a lot and try to, even though it wasn't voluntary, but compare it to the context where I come from, North Africa, Morocco, and where the question of identity, similar question, is actually very much entangled with colonial histories and social struggle, and it is in somewhat like, I wouldn't say unfinished, but still discussed a lot. It's a heavy question, and it was very, I wouldn't say interesting, but it was this exhibition was all about the aesthetics of this question, and really from a portraiture perspective, but really just, which I am not judging, or really I'm not comparing or giving value to context over the other. That's not where I'm trying to go. It's just that it was interesting to see how sometimes an institution could unbalance the question, or really how, like, the risk of aestheticizing something that is still ongoing in other contexts, and how it could harm the question, if that makes sense. But
so would you say that the choice of this art, what did the Albertina do to the show? To put it very blankly.
It was very weird. It was too polished, it was way on the aesthetic side, and I felt
that the work lost their power through that
I think
polishing?
so. I wasn't familiar with the work prior visiting the show, but I definitely felt that it was completely bland with the way that it was displayed, and also I felt that it was a bit detached from realities of this topic in other contexts, and it would have been nice to see it otherwise, which other institutions are clearly doing very amazingly here. For instance, today we saw the exhibition, and also a museum, we saw the exhibition of Ibrahim Mahama at Kunsthalle, and yeah, the exhibition was really brilliant. It puts the show into context. It's using embodied language, and it also displays the vulnerabilities of the topic. It doesn't matter the grandeur of the institution that is hosting it. And I think that a similar approach, as my friend here mentioned, the improper walls, and another exhibition that I really, really like too, on a tongue's tip, at a world's tip, also managed to do.
Where was that?
It was at, voilà.
Kunstraum Niederösterreich. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Like, how far can an institution like the Albertina take the risk of not being shiny? And I feel that it often kills shows. I wrote about one of these occasions as well in the past, where the art is, if it's too nicely framed and you don't do any radical gestures, then sometimes you do a disservice to the art. But yeah, so that's a question for institutions. Yeah, how far can they stroll from what they have been expected historically to be doing, to make things look proper and polished, and speak with all the kind of language that goes with that, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Yeah,
and if I may add something about the art spaces and the scene, I mean, talking about improper spaces for improper walls, I feel that something that's was completely striking is the presence of off spaces. We were talking about this today, off spaces here in Vienna. I find this concept really marvelous, and I think that's it's a very solid and lasting infrastructure, and it feels that thanks to these off spaces, they're completely balancing the weight of institutions like Albertina and complementing them. And if I were to compare that to the context in Morocco, for sure there are artist-run spaces and of course many spaces. I don't want to portray Morocco as underfunded or even compare it to Vienna, to Austria, because these are two different ecosystems and they run differently. But the remark that we shared this morning was that the spaces in my context, there is this feeling that they are constantly reinventing themselves and reoperating from scratch, and so we are stuck in some sort of loop or repetition of the same questions presented differently, but at the core it's the same topics. While here it feels that it's a conversation that is evolving, that is ongoing, and that's over dialogues with these institutions. I'm not finding the right word, but perhaps Gabriel can help me.
No, yeah, I feel the same. I mean, the scene, the material conditions of the scene here are amazing, and this balance between off spaces and big institutions is really amazing. Although in São Paulo we have the second oldest art biennial and a huge art market, we have only, the scene is quite small in comparison. We have about 10 off spaces and 2 magazines. So I think it's quite interesting to see as a good remark about the visit, about these 10 days here. Quite interesting to see how things are organized, and these different voices and different perspectives can somehow tension each other here. I think you're referring to this, yeah.
With a third player being the galleries as well, of course, yeah, to also pay homage to their work. But go on, yeah.
I'll try to be brief. Okay, so what we have been hearing for the last week is that even though material conditions are objectively better, for example, than from a place where I come from, which is relatively similar because I come all the way from Zagreb, which operates within a similar, comparable ecosystem, but much smaller and much less developed and certainly not as well funded. But I really do not wish to emphasize that the conditions here are better, because I think they're rather diverse. Between off spaces and various major institutions, and also I try to be a comrade because what I have heard also from many of you here in the audience is that the conditions here are also going in the very wrong directions. In terms of what shows, I'll just try to, I kind of stood out to me, I'll just be very, very brief. What I liked very much was a show which was already mentioned, and it was The Silence of the Volcano, and we have the curator here. And I was very impressed by the way that she articulated radical struggles politically, but also related that to the art that was being presented there. And I was also negatively impressed to what extent I myself, as a critic, as somebody who contemplates art, needed this kind of helping hand to allow me entry into an artistic context that I did not fully understand. And also the show I liked very much and that I could so very easily relate to was the one curated by Doppelgänger, which was at Musa. Sadly, it only was open for 9 days, but I think it speaks a great deal to what extent it is difficult to write these days about the context, perhaps, which is geographically, historically, and in a great many ways different. But also what...
Which context could you just say for
Doppelgänger,
those who don't know?
Sorry?
For those who don't know the show...
I know. I just mentioned that it was there, but it was actually taken down a day before. So sadly it cannot be seen. But yes, it's. I will just. It's Festival for Art and Activism, so that organized the show. To cut the long story short, I mean, one of the things, to come back to your actual question as to why I teach at certain workshops, trying to advocate for entry into the world of arts by various audiences, but perhaps are intimidated. Well, one of the reasons, of course, is because there is a great deal of space for radical politics in the field, and paradoxically also that is, I think, one of the major problems of radical politics today, is because it has been happening within these spaces, such as the art world, and it's perhaps not taken further out there.
Yeah, I mean, how do I begin? I think I've been impressed by very little in Vienna, and what I mean by that, I mean it's tricky because I think the Jitka Hanlova exhibition is kind of a perfect example to pull apart, because you mentioned this idea of a radical gesture in an institution, which I don't think is possible actually. I think that's an antithetical thing for an institution to do, a substantively radical gesture, in the same way that I think it was Derrida that said that any sign that makes its way into the political governmental sphere loses all of its grit. The same can be said about art. You know, once a so-called political practice or political idea enters the museum, it becomes a mausoleum. There's just complete evacuation of any of the stakes involved in those politics, right, in life. But back to Madame Hanlova. I think that with her, what was really striking to me was that the show was essentially what I was talking about earlier on tonight, which is that it was entirely about her experience without much of a relation to the world outside. And these thematics that Soukaina was talking about could be so easily mapped onto the current political situation in the world, with the genocide in Gaza, with Palestine, with displacement, with the dislocation that is happening in the region. And you know, it was strange and aberrant to see the absence of that attempt to even make that connection. And I live in Berlin, and I've been living there for 6 years, and one of the things that has struck me, that has been continuous between the two cities, Berlin and Vienna, is, again, the lack of kind of articulation around Palestine and how that shapes the conditions for cultural work and cultural production and the way that art is shown. And Andrea's exhibition was truly one of the very few moments where this articulation happened, and in response to another struggle elsewhere. I mean, this idea that every struggle is connected. There is always a symmetry between world historical frames, right? And I think that what I really loved about your show at Improper Walls was that you made that concerted attempt to contextualize not just a specific historical moment in Guatemala, but to show how there are continuities with the now. And that kind of bravery is not rewarded by institutions. And to make it, you know, another example is that we were told that the Belvedere 21 had a show that was that Improper Walls was part of, and in the dedication, when they dedicated the exhibition to a Lebanese person and a Palestinian person, that dedication was erased. It was just erased by the institution. And so Improper Walls took that step and said, we're not going to accept these conditions of intervention, and we're going to pull out of the exhibition. And it's funny because what the principle I want to meet out here and pull out the finer point is that institutions and off spaces exist in this kind of cruel dialectic where these radical groups and curators at places like Improper Walls do things that institutions want to absorb and take some sheen from. And when it gets to a point where, and it's not even anything, it's a dedication. You know, what does a dedication really do? It's a gesture, right? But even that is an aberration to the moral order of the vacuous, bovine-brained curatorial infrastructure of the museum, that has to be the thing that negates the thrust of a project. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent. But the point I'm trying to get at is that the off spaces like Improper Walls bear the brunt of this, and the institutions are able to keep setting the metric. And this also, again, it goes back to this idea that I said before, which is that there is no avant-garde because the institution is the thing that prevents the avant-garde from being formed. The institution is the one that is preventing a kind of concerted mass movement against bourgeois tradition and culture to be formed, because artists want, you know, it's this kind of circular thing, I don't need to explain it. But I think that what Vienna has really showed me, and it's really sort of just, yeah, it's made me more strong in my convictions about, you know, loathing living in Berlin, loathing being in Europe. But also that, you know, there is a struggle, and that there is a struggle that is being actively articulated by people elsewhere. And I think that is a principle of hope that I hold on to. And so I think that for me, the Viennese art scene has been like relatively bleak, relatively provincial, but there have been these moments that have broken through where I think that I can keep going on as well.
Okay, thank you for these very open comments. I'd like to invite the audience to chime in, to ask questions, comment. Yes.
Hello. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that you didn't find a lot of good exhibitions like with friction or political issues. I'm sorry, you could have gone to Graz last week to the Steirischer Herbst Festival, Styrian Fall, that had the title Never Again Peace, and there you had a lot of works dealing with Gaza, with Ukraine, and I think that was would have been what you would have been looking for. But what I was going to say, I'm president of ICA Austria, and I was wondering who of you is member of ICA, and how do you see ICA in your country? Is it important? Is it not important? Does it help? Maybe you can answer.
ICA being for those who are not familiar with it, the international association, or one of the international associations.
We actually
of
also
criticism.
sponsored this event a little bit.
Well, I'm a member of ICA Croatia. In fact, I'm a member of an executive body of it. It's one of the reasons why I can't really disown the name of a critic, because I have that blue card that I travel around with. How do I see? Well, we have a number of programs that we are currently trying to launch. However, I don't think that as some kind of critics association we have much wiggle room, to be perfectly honest. I mean, of course, you know, we exist in project space. And in the project space, I mean, you can do so much. I mean, you can have, for example, organize discussions. You can organize discussions.
So you do have a space.
Sorry?
You do have a space?
Not a physical space.
Ah, okay.
I mean, there is not much room for changing the actual material conditions and changing positions, changing material conditions for critics. What we can do, as I said, we can organize countless workshops on how to write about contemporary art and why is there a crisis of writing. But of course, we depend on the larger field of the media in which this operates, and in that respect, I mean, basically, our hands are tied. So I don't think in that respect there is much room just other than to reiterate that. I mean, ultimately, it would be. I mean, there is a paradoxical thing here, for example, going on in the ecosystem in which I function. There is perhaps 2 or 3 media in which you can actually write art criticism, whatever we decide the definition of that is, or some art writing. When in fact, if you organize workshops on how to write on contemporary art, you will probably get better funding, or just, you know, kind of, you know, remain within that life cycle of life sustenance, so to speak. So yeah. There isn't really much room. I think unionization in the field is the way forward, and this is something that we have been hoping for, but it's also very difficult because, I mean, there are all kinds of animosities and misunderstandings between various professions, some which we all subsume under a single name. But sometimes there is basically not enough solidarity between artists, between art critics, curators, translators, you know, basically people working in a similar field and under similar conditions, but rather than addressing the power structures, we address our not so drastically different conditions.
Thanks. Other remarks or questions? Yes.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for the talk and your statements. And I can totally understand when your opinion of Vienna might be that it's a little bit provincial and boring. But I was in Venice last year, and I have to say that Venice was boring too for me. And do you have any recommendations internationally where I can see some critical, brave, and courageous statements in art? Maybe other cities or whatever. And at the end, did you figure out some thoughts of Ingeborg Bachmann, what she would say about the Viennese art scene when she would stroll through the exhibitions?
I'm going to answer your question backwards. I think that I would just quote the last line of Marlena and say, it was war, it was always war. That's what she would say, I think. I think it's a constant battle, a constant struggle. In terms of practices that are, I mean, yes, Venice is inherently boring. I mean, who wants to go see a fucking World Fair again? It's 2025, for God's sakes. But I mean, like, at the end of the day, right, I mean, like, the idea of, like, wanting to find a, you know, cohesive group of artists or an event that makes you feel like, you know, there's some hope in art writ large is a delusion. You know, that's not going to happen. I think that the individual practice is perhaps the best way to go. And so some names that I think about is, you know, an artist duo in Berlin, friends of mine, Basim Assad and Sanja Grostinic, who've just made a work called Permanent Trespass based on a script-based performance, originally commissioned by Kunsthaus Musanturm and Ashkal Awan in 2021. And it's taken on different episodic forms in the last 4 years. They've just made a film, and it is truly, in terms of a cinematic work, quite experimental. It is essentially tracing the end of the so-called American century through a dialogic encounter between the war in Yugoslavia and the war in Lebanon. And it folds in Ernst Bloch's The Principle of Hope, for instance. So he has this idea of the novum, which is the rupture of liberation, that becomes a structuring device in the film. And I think that in terms of, again, I'm constantly iterating Benjamin because I teach him, and I love him, who couldn't. But you know, they really match that idea of formal artistic experimentation with an admirable leftist political tendency, and so they're two artists that I extremely respect and I love. But I think that if in this also, I think your question also opens up a greater question about how we access art, right? I mean, you're citing the Venice Biennial, and, you know, implicit in that is also institutional infrastructures. And these are the only kind of apertures that we have, or that mass culture has, to engage with art. And that's the real problem, because people, you know, in good faith try to find, you know, a kind of movement or a contemporary consensus as to where the avant-garde is happening. But it doesn't happen in those places. It comes through sort of individual practices that have to either, you know, that you hear through a panel like this, or you hear in some other form. But they're a bit more subversive, a bit more covert. But also depends on what kind of, like, interesting thing, like, that you consider, right? I mean, like, you might be interested in, say, the developments in painting or lithography. I don't know, but, like, I think that for me, what's interesting is that kind of, like, political thrust. So those are two names: Basim Assad and Sanja Grostinic. Yeah.
Is it? Do you, in your context, do you find more of this radical work that you missed here, or in other contexts that you've been in?
Yes, for me, for sure, yeah. And I'm usually involved with these productions. And to make justice to the many galleries, to some galleries you saw, I think the show in Exile and in Christine Koenig, Chapter 3, were exceptions in this. I mean, I was talking in general terms when I spoke about lack of friction. I think these two are two good exceptions in their own terms, working politically. But yes, in Brazil, yes, and mostly with the artists I work with, this sort of radicalism or political worries are much more present.
For me, no. I think in Morocco, the debate is much. I'm not going to compare because, again, I'm not very familiar with the scene here, and I actually think it's very vast, and I think I like what I saw. So, but no, in Morocco, the infrastructure is lacking, I think. So there are some interesting spaces, but it's mostly commercial galleries, and yeah. So I wouldn't say it's radical. Yeah, and also I would like to say that there are an artist duo here present with us that I really enjoyed so much, and they are not boring, in case you would like to do a studio visit. So Raphael and Guy and Guillerme, and their work was actually very, very playful and interesting and radical too, I think.
Thank you. And for those who are now wondering, because of course we couldn't show them the whole Viennese art scene in 1 week, how did we choose what we would show? Well, It's always a nomination system, so each year the critics are nominated in a collaboration with ICA for one of the critics, and then the other critics are nominated by fellow critics, and then the different artists are nominated as well in that system, so we don't always show the same people. It's not basically our choice, and we go to see the shows in institutions and the whole of Curated by, so we pride ourselves. I don't know if many people go to see each and every show, but we always do with the critics. And you mentioned Steirische Herbst before. We used to go to Steirische Herbst. We had a partnership, but unfortunately Steirische Herbst discontinued the partnership this year.
So for all of you, just for all of you who still have time until October 12th, please go to Graz and see the show.
Yes, so that's how we come to our choices. So it's not, basically our taste that we reiterate each and every year, but it's really trying to diversify. Other thoughts or questions? Push back. Yes.
Maybe more a question, like a little bit also curiosity question, but also like also point, because you were talking a lot about like material conditions, but also like organizing within as a class, as cultural workers, as artists. I was kind of wondering from the context, because I'm also part of the board here at the IG Bildende Kunst. We represent artist rights mainly. We also have associated members who are curators sometimes. And here recently in Austria, also the Austrian Association for Curators also recently got founded. But I think that still like these classes are kind of like separate. While in the, for example, here in Austria at the working chamber, we are actually all represented by the same syndicate, actually. And I was kind of wondering from your context, like if there are any form of like such organizations, and also how this plays out, basically, this organization between curators, cultural workers, art mediators. Because I think that here, for example, we could also work better together. But yeah, this is maybe also like a question of discussion as well.
Well, in Brazil there are no such organizations, so we've been every now and then we try to think about something but no, nothing in this as you have here.
Actually, this is a relatively lively time for unionization of cultural workers in Croatia. Though when I say that, I think we are still a minority who try to somehow engage and bring us all together. Of course, you know, the field of arts in this respect is very diverse, and there are various demands and various, the material conditions also are vastly different across various artistic fields. So it's going to be a very long discussion, but also it has to do with the fact that, as I said, there is a great deal of animosity, and there is a great deal of individual animosity. And also there is this basic thought that really isn't learned at school, so to speak, and it really needs to be instilled that a union is something, it's a legal body that can actually negotiate with power, whereas different organizations may address different identities in terms of professional identities and interests and so on, but cannot really be a political body in that respect. And I also think there is a political inheritance generally coming from a post-socialist country that doesn't necessarily create favorable conditions for unionizations. And also, you know, in my local, but I think this is very local, but I will just brief it. There is general how should I call it, mistrust of the unions, because there are great many, and they have not necessarily created better working conditions in the vast majority of professions. I mean, it's not universal, but generally speaking so. And also, you know, it has to do with the political position you're taking. So not every, I mean, many artists are bourgeois and they think, you know, they're having a lovely time.
Would you consider yourself bourgeois, like the four of you?
Would you consider yourself bourgeois?
Mixed
for those
race,
online?
I guess.
I'd love to, but no.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm in this respect. I would kind of call myself. I don't know whether it's it can be a joke, but it's kind of mixed race. That's my position. I am also working class, but I certainly have a kind of bourgeois background in the sense that I was privileged enough to be offered material conditions for education. As to what I did with that, that's another thing.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because bourgeois is both a precise economic, or we're talking Marxian terms. It's, you know, there is a kind of equation you can draw from there, but it is also an affect. I'm very working class in the sense that my parents were first generation immigrants to Australia from Hong Kong. I grew up in a village in Australia in a Chinese restaurant. So I had no interaction with culture for most of my life. But I subsequently ended up going to law school. I went to Sydney University, studied art history and gender studies, and all those things as an aggregate give me the affect of a bourgeois person. I also, you know, operate in this world and comport myself in a certain way. But I think that I haven't experienced a class ascension for all the reasons that we've just spoken about. I earn 180 euros a piece. You know, I teach at a university on a casual contract. There are ways to look chic and act it, but there is also a distinction between that and actually being bourgeois. So I would say no, I am not.
Absolutely not. I work as a freelance curator. So I'm not bourgeois at all.
And bourgeoisie means upper class, but there is no more upper class.
Other thoughts? If not, yes. Or is there something you would say? Some last words. I would pick up one thread that Miona launched, and that I think is a big thread and potentially threat. You spoke about the end of the word or the end of the written word, and of course, I mean. There are many ways from which we could take that, and that has to do a lot with, I don't know if that's the way you see it, but I'm curious, technology, a certain kind of illiteracy and lack of desire to read longer, complicated texts, growing lack of ability of reading such texts, understanding them, comes out through all the studies that are done, even at people at the level of people who have a high school degree. The inability to fully grasp a text and sum up the arguments and all of these kind of things, which goes hand in hand with AI to a certain degree replacing some of our professions. I mean, if a text doesn't have to be signed, a lot of people, I think, can now rely on AI. I don't know if any of the galleries now do, but I certainly have seen texts that sounded AI generated way before AI-generated text existed. so I felt that sometimes the press release was particularly amenable to being written by AI because it's often so generic. But it's half a joke. But yeah, so how is there a way to respond to this? Is it part of our task to respond to it, or do we just cultivate the people who are able to read and work with those not so happy few, not so privileged few that we are? What is your thought? Yes, definitely.
Service announcement. There will be a panel on AI with Klaus on October 24th. So happy to see you back then.
No, I didn't seed it voluntarily, but of course it's a preoccupation that I have. But as you brought in this lack of the word, so I thought I...
Yeah, okay, just a couple of brief entries. It can go either way, of course. We can slip back into oral culture. Of course, written culture has been, 5,000 years long, so it's just a tiny fraction of the history of humanity. But yes, I'm happy to see a lot of art discourse die out, possibly as a result of AI, because it's mainly just jargon, and basically prior to the actual omnipresence of AI in the creation of any kind of art discourse. I mean, there was the human AI that was creating it. That was the ultimate, other than, of course, the material conditions in the field, that was the ultimate enemy against not just I, but a number of us who are educators in the field were pitted. And as to to which direction that it's going to take, it takes a lot of courage to speculate. But I don't think, given that you're going to have a serious debate on that, there is room for this kind of speculation right now.
Any thoughts on your side?
Yeah, I personally don't think that AI could replace any of us ever. I think that AI could never make volcanoes speak, or stage relations, or understand gaps, or these are things that are only for the very privileged human beings, and AI will never replace us. And actually, I just wanted to share a little anecdote. Yesterday, with my friend here, Miona, when we were discussing this talk, we came across this notion of performed criticism. So we're like, what is this? So we asked ChatGPT. We asked ChatGPT to define performed criticism, and the answer was very ambiguous, and it basically said that performed criticism is criticism that doesn't use the outlet of text, and that is basically something that you can read or just sing, perhaps, or so it's like a performative type of practice.
Yeah, that is true. But we actually we thought we didn't know what the answer was, but we knew. But we needed the authority to confirm, because we say perform. We know what that is. We actually described it, and then ChatGPT confirmed it. But yeah, there is an interesting reversal of roles there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd say we lift this part of the meeting. There is drinks here to follow up on the conversation. As I said, informants on censorship are more than welcome.
I just want to respond to Soukaina, what you said, because I've done like a 3-hour seminar on AI, and then the guy said, so I hope that this seminar helped all of you. And I said, no, I write my own texts.
Yeah, definitely. The conversation will happen in October. It's on ethics and AI. What is an ethical AI is the question we'll be discussing. It's in a different format, Wiener KI-Gespräche. So if some of you are interested, of course, you're more than welcome to join there. It's not specifically on art. So the question of AI and art, we did discuss 2 years ago already in Crit Cross. It's still online accessible. If you want some ideas that we discussed at that point with less developed LLMs than we have them now. But I'm happy that today we stayed on the human side and on the visits and the human experiences. And thank you all for coming here, and thank you very much for sharing your insights. And thank you, Depot, again for hosting this.
Thank you. Have a good night.